Yeah, but I'm not sure if I got an answer there. No, because that doesn't answer my question whatsoever. I don't know if you're not listening to anything that I'm saying, but you respond with something completely different than what we're talking about and then act like it's an own on me when it's literally not related whatsoever. Oh my
That's what
goodness.
we're
You're not going to
debating.
respond to anything I'm saying.
Okay, so then I got a more specific question from you here.
It's the same question like 5 freaking times now. It's the same question over and over. You gotta be kidding me.
Have I answered your question?
No.
And generations. You laugh, but it's true, and you have no rebuttal for it.
Because we agree on it! We freaking agree! You keep talking about crap that we agree on! I don't care!
Let's talk about what we disagree.
No! No! I've been trying to do that! I've been trying to do that for like 30 minutes!
So we are going to be doing a debate on the ethnostate. So let's bring on our guests. First up, let's bring on Mr. Tom Foolery. How are you?
Doing well. How are you, Brittany?
Doing good. So yeah, if you want to introduce yourself, tell people where you lie on the political spectrum and where people can find you.
Yeah, my name's Tom. I go by Tom Foolery. You can find me on YouTube under Tom Foolery Show or on Twitter /TomFooleryP. I am kind of a centrist, kind of in the middle. I identify as conservative, Christian conservative, or neoconservative, a very liberal version of conservatives. I do like debates, debate coaching, linguistics, pragmatics, and semantics on my show. And then we also help other people go over their debates as well. Oh, and I'm currently streaming live right now on YouTube as well.
Yeah, and I also want to get us on Entropy too. I always forget to do that. But all right, so let's bring on Ronnie. How are you?
Doing well, Brittany. How about yourself?
Doing good. So yeah, same questions. If you want to introduce yourself, tell people where you lie on the political spectrum and where people can find you.
Yeah, my name's Ronnie Cameron. You can find me on Telegram, Odyssey, and Twitter. I also upload on BitChute, although I haven't been very active on there. I think Odyssey is the place to be. I consider myself to be part of the dissident right, the pro-white right. I'm socially conservative. I have some left-leaning positions when it comes to fiscal concerns, but I'm basically right-wing.
Okay, and we are now up on Entropy as well. So we're on Entropy. What?
Oh, Tom, is the private messaging popping up on your stream?
It is not.
Okay.
But I also don't see it. So.
Okay, no problem.
It's off the slide.
Yeah, no problem. All right.
Cool. Okay. All right, so yeah, here's what we'll do. Each person can give an opening statement. It can be as little as 1 minute, no longer than 5, about the topic and your stance. After that, we'll open up the floor. For those watching, if you have questions, tag Politically Provoked so we know you're talking to us and not the chat. We'll get to the questions at the end. We can accept super chats on Odyssey and Entropy, but we've lost our YouTube, so we're kind of not able to do it on there. But if it remains low numbers,
we're going to get it back. We're going to get it back. They're going to give it back.
Kevin Castley said he lost his and it took 3 months and he got it back, but he did lose it for different reasons. So, but it's all right. All right. So yeah, why don't we get started with opening statements? Ronnie, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go first. All right. So there are 3 main reasons for why I believe an ethno-state is a good idea. The first has to do with preservation. The second is anchored around conflict resolution. And the last pertains to the anti-whiteism we see permeating society. So on preservation, whites are essentially the only racial group being threatened with racial extinction, be it intentional or simply a byproduct of mass immigration to the West. I believe it is being done intentionally, but for this debate, intentionality doesn't really matter. It's irrelevant. What does matter is the fact that whites are heading towards a slow extinction due to mass immigration. And I believe the creation of an ethno-state ensures whites can avoid that slow burning extinction. White preservation is important if we actually care about global diversity. If whites go extinct, that's essentially one less variation of humans we have on this planet. If diversity is a human strength, then we ought to preserve the white race as to maximize our diversity as a human species. More races equals more global diversity. Therefore, white preservation should be a concern to anybody who appreciates human diversity on any level. On conflict resolution, an ethnostate helps actually quell political and social conflict and political divide regarding identity politics by allowing dissident whites to have a place of their own. This would truly be a win-win for all parties if you think about it, because clearly racial tensions and other far-right versus far-left conflicts have reached a boiling point in the West. So all sides win by having far-right whites exit the host nation to form a state of their own. In this scenario, the left gets rid of the evil white supremacists. Normies get to go on enjoying the multicultural West as it is, and the pro-white right gets to have a nation of their own and leave behind an undesirable society that cares not for them. And lastly, and I guess this has to do with Brittany's favorite little Timmy topic, that's whites suffer as a result from things like diversity hiring practices, media attacks, and literal physical attacks on the streets. This happens in the school systems and elsewhere. And things are only getting worse for whites as we head towards being a minority in our own country. So a white ethno-states ensures white safety, ensures white well-being.
All right, done.
Yeah, okay. So I personally, I am completely against like the anti-white rhetoric that goes on, especially in the online left. And I think that stuff's really cringe and it's obnoxious, and I speak out against it anytime that I see it. But I don't think that it's like a real thing. I don't see it often. It's like a very small, minute group of people that are irrelevant, just the same as any ethno-stater is like a small, minute, irrelevant group of people that like people aren't really worried about. Most of us just go about our daily lives. We all get along. There's not really any problems. And most of us don't seem to care about race all that much. Those who do, whether they're black or white or Latino or whatever, they are all small, minute, irrelevant groups of people that don't seem to shake things up too much, don't seem to make too big of a fuss to where any of us should ever really care about their problems or the things that they want to get done. I'm not concerned with race whatsoever. I don't care about diversity. Diversity is cool, but not for the sake of diversity. I don't like diversity just because of diversity. Diversity comes with some things that are pluses. It also comes with some things that are negatives. The negatives are bad. The pluses are good. That, like, it's as simple as that. But I don't like diversity just because it's diversity. I like things like bringing in more workers when we need more workers, when businesses need to fill positions. I like getting lots of new immigrants in here to fill those positions. I don't care if they're white or whatever color. I just want them to come in. There's sometimes that we need to test on like how many, or like college educated or things like that based on what the country needs. And that's always what I'm going to, Todd, your private chats are popping up. I'm sorry. I missed it earlier. But yeah, outside of that, like I think that we need to test for the things that we need in the country. If we don't need immigration, I don't want immigration. But if people want to go and buy their own land and take over that land and just allow whites there, I don't think anybody's going to stop them. They're allowed to do that all they want. But as for the rest of us, we live in a democracy, so we do what most of us want to do. And most of us just don't care about it enough to do anything like that. So, yeah.
Okay, I guess we can open up the floor then.
Okay, so there's a couple things you said there that I want to talk about. First, you said that the anti-whiteism isn't real. You said that you're essentially against it. You see it happen in certain spheres online, but this isn't really a real world problem. Well, it definitely is a real world problem. We have corporations as large as Coca-Cola talking about how they could be less white. I mean, this is a meme at this point. I could bring up several examples of how that's the case. We also have diversity hiring practices, diversity quota mandates, whether it's academically oriented or in the workplace, etc. These are all things that are anti-white policies in nature. We can debate about that. If we want to talk about crime, if we want to talk about, you know, what's happening on a street level, what's happening in the school systems, I mean, there are tons of video documentation out there of whites literally being attacked simply because they're white. And I don't see the equivalent happening on the other side. In fact, I've challenged leftists to show me equivalent video documentations of blacks being chased down, blacks being targeted because, you know, they're black, blacks being targeted and robbed because, you know, for whatever reasons, whites think they have more money or whatever. These things don't happen. But the same thing happens on conversely. Whites are literally targeted because they're white, whether it's them being robbed and blacks looking at them as being more wealthy and more likely to have money, etc., or, you know, just being bullied in schools. So I could talk about anecdotal situations that I think you would probably just dismiss, and it doesn't really hold too much weight here. But I mean, even looking at macro level statistics, blacks cause more violent crimes than whites. So whites are essentially at the shitty end of the stick in terms of crime statistics, to put it bluntly.
Okay. So anti-white hiring practices, I don't think that like looking for more of one group is necessarily anti-white. I would say it's probably not a good practice and it's probably racist, but it's not specifically targeted towards whites, right? Like if they say, hey, we want to get more black people, I don't think all Latinos and all Asians and all Jewish people, I don't think everybody's going to be like, well, what about us? It's only white people who turn around and are like, this is anti-white because you want more of one specific group. Or sometimes if they just want less of whites because whites are by far the majority and they want, you know, more diversity in their company. That's not necessarily...
Are you familiar with the Coke campaign thing that was happening?
I am. So wanting less whites, the goal was not just to get less whites. The hope was to have more of other people, right?
It was actually to be less white. Coke wanted to rebrand itself so that it wasn't considered to be a white product. Traditionally, Pepsi has outsold Coke or has done better with minorities than Coca-Cola has. So they literally had a meeting to discuss how they could be seen as less white.
Right. Because the goal isn't the problem isn't with white people. The goal is to have more of other people, right? They're not against white people.
Matter. The byproduct of what's happening is anti-whiteism. This is an argument that the left brings up a lot, and there's actually some weight to it. It doesn't matter if the person is intentionally trying to be mean to blacks. If the policy or, you know, whatever protocols are being implemented, if they happen to be anti-black, that's all that matters. So the people behind it don't actually have to be anti-white, but the policies, the things that are being done are anti-white. Would you not agree with that?
I would say that it's just racist in general to exclude any sort of group. I don't think it's necessarily anti-white just because they want more of another group. I think the intentionality is all that matters.
That's trying to be less black. You would never see a meeting happening behind closed doors or in public. You know, how can we be seen as less black or less pro-Hispanic? That would never happen. There's only one race that is essentially targeted against.
Yeah, of course, because like there's a lot more trouble, or black people have a lot more trouble getting into a lot of these jobs and into a lot of these schools and into a lot of these areas that white people succeed at. So it would make sense that there wouldn't be people doing the opposite.
I don't think one follows the other. It doesn't make sense for Coca-Cola to say, hey, let's try to be less white because blacks are struggling in school.
Wait, no, but that's what you said. You said we don't see the opposite. I'm responding to that, saying, yeah, of course we don't see the opposite. That's not really relevant, though.
Of course it's relevant. It doesn't really... Well, I mean, it does matter why these things are happening. At the end of the day, all that matters is these things are happening. If whites are being vilified in the media, if corporations are trying to be less white, if companies are hiring more blacks and Hispanics, it doesn't matter the reasoning behind it. Essentially, whites are at the shitty end of the stick, and this cannot be denied. I don't even care to get into the weeds with people at the end of the day, how we got into this situation. The bottom line is, if you're a white man in America, things are hard for you. They're harder than they've ever been.
Wait, how
and
does
they're
that
only going
make
to get
things
worse.
hard for white people if they're still by far like the majority in these positions? Why? Like, especially when we look at corporate positions, white people are overrepresented in those positions. We're like 62% of the country and we're representing like 70 something percent of these positions. So how does that make sense that somehow we're being oppressed in these areas?
Old stock lineage. Whites were there first. It's natural that they're going to accumulate wealth. That wealth is going to sustain itself through family,
That's
etc.
not
And
relevant.
so it's perfectly normal to expect, say, maybe 60% of whites to hold 70% of powerful positions. That's not really like astronomically disproportionate.
That's not
I mean, if we
relevant.
talk about 2% of Jews representing 50% of billionaires, 50% of millionaires, if we talk about 13% of blacks representing 52% of crime, those are astronomically disproportionate. But whites, 60% and 70, I mean, get real.
True, but that's not relevant. Whether or not it makes sense, I didn't say anything about what it not making sense. You didn't respond to anything I said at all. I, I. Do you want to try again, or do you want me to repeat it?
What you just said?
Yeah, I said that there's not like a disproportionate there's not a disproportionality for white people within these positions. So when you say it's really hard for white people right now when they disproportionately are represented in these positions, it doesn't make sense that you would say this is somehow really hard for white people or there's some sort of oppression for white people in these areas.
I never made the argument that in terms of powerful positions, white people are being oppressed. I said in general, in the workplace and in academia, there is a demand for diversity. This makes it harder for white people to get accepted. This is an unfair challenge that white people are met with, because if they have the exact same prerequisites as a black candidate, often the black man will get, or the black woman will get the job simply because there's a demand for it. Same thing in the school system. I mean, this is undeniable at this point. I mean, even Asians are in uproar because they're met with the same difficulties. They have to outperform black students by like 20, 40 points on SAT scores to get into universities. This is
some
unreal.
Universities, yeah. I would have to see that there's some sort of like disproportionality when you say that that's the outcome, or that the outcome is that it's harder for them. Not that there's just like anti-white rhetoric or what you would consider anti-white rhetoric, but that the outcome makes it to where it's actually harder for them. If they are still overrepresented in these positions, it's not harder for them. It's actually a lot easier for them than anybody else.
You're completely missing the point. Let's say we dump in 1 million white people into Japan, and all of a sudden, Japanese companies and Japanese universities have this demand for diversity hiring. So when they're looking at applications, they're actually favoring whites over Asians. That would be unfair towards the host people, the indigenous people of Japan. That would be unfair to them. That would essentially be anti-Japanese policy being implemented to benefit whites. That would be unfair.
So
do you
think
agree?
Do you think it's also unfair to Native Americans that white people are overrepresented?
You just keep looking at things in terms of overrepresentation, and you want everything to be equal. What I'm talking about
I don't
is
care
equal
about it being equal.
Best man for the job. You think I complain that the NFL is 75% black? No, obviously they're doing something fantastic to get themselves into athletic positions. Why can't the same be said for whites and Asian in terms of their academic ability, or Jews for that matter?
Okay, so you're not saying this is hard for white people. You're saying this is hard for white individuals then.
Both.
Well, again, it can't be both. If they're overrepresented, then it's good for white people. White people are doing really well. So it's not both. It's only the individual that you would have an issue with.
No, it's the group that I have an issue with. Like, I'm a white individual, yet I don't feel I've ever been overturned for a job or a university application because of my race. However, I know friends of mine, I know people on the internet that have had these things happen to them. So I care about my group. Just like, not every black person has been called the N-word or has been, targeted on the street, but yet, it's logical for them to care about their people. It's logical for a Jew to care about his people, etc. So yes, I care about the individuals and I care about the group.
Yes, but you didn't explain how this applies to the group. You're still talking about the individual. Like if one white person stubs his toe, you're not going to say this is a horrible thing for the white race, right? No, it's just a bad thing for each individual that stubs their toe. Yeah, again, it means that like when we look at the outcomes, it means that things are easier for white people, not harder. So if you want to talk about it's harder for some individuals who happen to be white, sure, that would make complete sense. But for you to say that this is harder for the white race in America, no, that you haven't even made an argument for that yet.
You're looking at who's in power, and you're saying that determines what's fair. But I gave you an example of how we could dump over Japanese. Immediately, it would be unfair. So your whole point of, oh, well, let's just look at the overall statistics to see who's in power. Oh, it's Japanese people. Well, everything's still fair and fine and dandy. We still have to do more to increase whites in a position of power. It's such a stupid ideology. Like, it's a leftist position. The fact that you consider yourself conservative is actually quite retarded.
Okay, so that's why I responded with asking, do you think it's unfair to Native Americans who inhabited this land before us that more white people are
You're
in these
opening a whole
positions?
different can of worms.
I'm
there.
not. That
We're
is
now
your
entering
point with
into
the
Native
Japanese
American debate,
position.
and I don't want to get into
No,
that.
you are saying that because Japanese people are there, it's their land, that now Japanese people should have those positions. And I'm saying, well, do you think it's unfair that Native Americans, when this was their land,
That's not even
that
the
they
point
would
of
have...
my argument. I brought up the Japanese scenario to describe to you how the majority could still have unfair policy being implemented on them.
But
that was the reason for me bringing up Japan.
But it's not unfair if they're still disproportionately represented. That doesn't make
then
any
you
sense.
just have you lack the intelligence to be able to
What
understand.
part is
and I'm willing to
unfair
move on
then?
to the other
What
point.
part is actually unfair?
Because a Japanese student or a Japanese worker would be met with unfair challenges. And it's just as simple as that. If whites are being favored over Japanese and a Japanese guy is competing for a job against a white, it's unfair for him, regardless of who represents the majority of power. If you don't understand that, you just got to think more.
You're still talking about the individual.
I don't know what to say.
You're only talking about the individual. You're not talking about them as a group. Okay. So move
on to the next point. How shall we?
Well, you had made 5 points off the rip and then interrupted me when I was responding to the first point, and then we got stuck on this line. You started off by talking about white suffering, hiring practices.
Yeah, is anti-whiteism real? That was the first point that you brought up that I attacked. You said, no, it's not. I said, yes, it is. I feel that I've made my case for anti-whiteism is real, at least on a corporate level in the academic institutions as far as policy is concerned. The attacks on whites, it becomes very anecdotal. It's, who can provide more video evidence or the better storytelling. But when we look at the crime stats, the stats don't lie. Blacks commit more crime, and whites are essentially at the shitty end of the stick. So yes, anti-whiteism is real. Whites do not benefit from being in this multicultural society that we're currently in. Then the other point that you made that I disagree with is you said race doesn't matter, that people don't care about race. You think it's just being blown out of proportion. Would we have the president of the United States celebrating the fact that whites are going to become a minority and say this is a good thing? Absolutely, race matters. Identity politics absolutely matters. Think of all the stores that have been looted as a result of Black Lives Matter. How could you possibly say that in 2022 America doesn't care about race? Like, you couldn't be more wrong. If you were in any other year pre-2016, you might have a chance to make that argument. But right now, I think both the left and the right would just laugh at you for saying that people don't think race matters.
I don't think anything you just said is true. Like, especially the president saying that it's going to be a good thing that white people become a minority. Every time I'm sent these quotes, it actually becomes that they're saying that like something else is a good thing. Not that white people becoming the minority is the good thing. That it's like, it's good that we're getting immigrants in to cover jobs. And so now white people are going to become a minority, but this is a good thing. Like, they just cut that last part out of context and say, oh, he said, but white people are going to become a minority, so this is a good thing. It's not that white people, they actually care about the fact that white people are becoming a minority. It's the fact that there are other good things that come with this.
Well, we're now talking about does race matter, not necessarily anti-whiteism. I don't necessarily think that Biden's sitting there thinking, I hate all those white people. What I'm arguing right now is that race matters. Biden making that statement and talking about how it's important to get Latinos jobs, Black Americans jobs, how it's a good thing that there's less white people. Clearly, race matters. I don't need to make the argument right now that he was doing this attack on whites, because right now we're talking about, does race matter?
Yes, but if you use it as an example to say that he actually cares about whether or not white people are the majority and he like would want them to be less, that he cares about race in that case. If you're going to use it as a point, then yes, like you're using that to say that he thinks race matters.
That's not the crux of the argument. The crux of the argument is that he's celebrating the fact that whites are going to become a minority. He's
But he's
publicized.
not.
He's making
That's
this
the
public
point.
because he knows race matters.
That's what I just
He
said. He's
wouldn't be
not
talking
doing
about
that.
this and making this a point. There wouldn't be a concern to get blacks more jobs. Black Lives Matter wouldn't even be a thing if race didn't matter. I mean, what are you even talking about here?
So
Like identity politics has basically been like, you know, the backbone of political conversation ever since Trump got elected, right?
yeah, so when I say race doesn't matter, I'm saying that like people don't care to group themselves by race. Now, if a group of people are
Explain
being
Black Lives Matter.
if a group of people are being oppressed based on their race, then yes, like we would have to separate them based on race. So if I walk into a room with 100 people, 20 of them, I only decide to take $5 from each one of them because of their race, I'm going to have to give $5 back to them based on their race. So like, it doesn't mean that I actually care about race. It means that I have to fix the problem based on the fact that that's how I created the problem in the first place.
So you don't think that Black Lives Matter members actually care about their race?
I'm a Black Lives Matter member. For the most part, we don't
That's
care
cringe
about
as
race.
fuck. But for the actual black people involved in the movement, do you think that they don't care about race, or do you think they do care about race?
You know, like it depends on which group you're talking about. If you're talking about the organization, they're a bunch of communists. They literally want to abolish race. So no, I don't think they care about race. If you're talking about the movement, like no, I don't think they care about race.
The average black person is very proud of their black identity. They will describe themselves typically as a black woman, a black man. It is part of their identity in which they take pride in. And I don't blame them for it. I think that's actually a good thing. But when I describe myself as, say, a proud white man, all of a sudden that's fucking evil. It's completely ridiculous. But for you to sit there and say that, you know, these groupings are just happening because everybody wants things to be equal. No, Jews care about Jews. Italians care about Italians. Blacks care. Italians are whites. I'm just saying, even on an ethnic level, we do have these little loyalties. Canadians care about Canadians, etc. It's not just something where the average person wants everything to be equal for everybody. People have their own specific bias concerns, right? There is another thing that you said. You said, okay, if a certain group is being victimized or oppressed, it's natural for them to group together. Why do you think white nationalism is happening?
Not
Whites
to
have been
group
victimized
together.
in schools. They've been
That's not what I said.
shut out of jobs. They've been vilified in
That's not what I
the
said.
media, and that's why we see white nationalists.
If I say that's not what I said, why would you continue arguing against something that I didn't say? Does that
Well,
make
sometimes
sense to
when
you?
somebody interrupts me, I don't just immediately shut up.
Well, that's going to be a problem because if you're going to keep arguing against things that I'm not saying, you're just going to waste your breath. Okay, like that's
Okay,
pointless.
so then how about you repeat or reiterate what you said? Because I heard you say when people are oppressed, it's natural for them to group together.
No, it's natural for us to group them together based on what it is that we're trying to fix. If we messed up things based on race, we would have to fix them based on race. That doesn't mean that people themselves are grouping together based on race.
We are talking about Black Lives Matter and other racial groups and their need to basically form different groups.
Not form groups, fix the issues based on race, not form groups.
Okay, well, I don't necessarily think that the main concern for, say, Black Lives Matter is the well-being of whites who are suffering because of racism and in society. Okay, they are specifically concerned with their own group. They're specifically concerned with the well-beings of blacks.
I mean,
so it's not just racial equality; it's black power, essentially.
Most of Black Lives
Matter.
Again,
you're just very ignorant.
When you say their group, like most of Black Lives Matter is filled with white people. We're the majority of the country. So when you say their group, that would be white people, but it's not their group. It's black people specifically that we would be worried about.
White well-being or white identity is not the engine. It's not the face. It's nothing insofar as Black Lives Matter is concerned, right?
I don't
care if whites represent a bigger portion of the American population and therefore more of them have grouped themselves to this Black Lives Matter thing. It is a pro-black movement. The blacks who are involved in it are concerned with their own group well-being. White nationalists have formed a similar type of movement. but we are called villains and blacks are called heroes. This is a problem.
Well, black people are being oppressed.
And so are whites in current day.
You would need to give some examples at some point of that happening.
We already went through anti-whiteism. We can, I guess, revisit the issue because that seems to be
okay.
The
Before we get to that, I don't. This isn't going to be too long. I'm not going to dwell on this too much. I just want to know, what do you mean by white? Like, is it like just looking at somebody and they look white? Is this based on DNA, or like lineage, like regional? What do you?
What race am I?
I would say white.
Okay, so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out, right?
So based on looks, right?
Mostly based on looks, you can tell, but sometimes there are situations where, like, you know, you could have an albino, you could have an extremely light-skinned Asian man who, if you see him in the right light, you might get confused. If you see a black and white photo, you can play all these kind of optics tricks to kind of confuse things. But just like somebody can confuse a raccoon for a cat, 9 out of 10 times you will never make that mistake, right?
Yeah.
So it's very easy to tell.
So there, I'm not sure if I didn't make this clear in my opening statement. I do believe that there are groups that are being oppressed, and there are lots of individuals that are being oppressed. If a bunch of black,
think whites are a group being oppressed?
Not a group being oppressed, but there are white people that are being oppressed.
Do you think blacks as a group are being oppressed?
I would say yes, in some ways, yes.
So why is it that only individual whites are being oppressed and not a group, but you will say blacks as a group are being oppressed, not just on an individual level? I'm confused.
I will get back to that. I wanted to say, so there are groups of people that are being oppressed, but if they all came up and said, hey, we want our own state, or we want our own ethno-state somehow, I would still think that's stupid, and I wouldn't be on board with that in any way. I don't know that you convincing me that white people in any way are oppressed would ever make people in general care. Most people think that black people are being oppressed. Most people would not be on board with black people having an ethno-state. So I don't know that this actually goes anywhere as far as an argument.
Well, there are two conversations that we can have. We can talk about practicality and whether or not something is possible. And then the other conversation is whether or not the idea is good. To put this into kind of an extreme situation, is the idea of teleportation good? Is that a good idea to have teleporters? Yes, it is. Can we actually make them? No, we can't. So if you are in favor of the idea of an ethno-state, if people are in favor and they say, yes, this is a good idea, that's my only goal. I'm not here to write up the blueprints as to how we're going to create this state, but I'm here to convince people that, yes, this is a good idea. One of the other points that I brought up is how the creation of an ethno-state would actually be good for everybody. It's a win-win for all parties involved. White people get a nation of their own. The left and centrists get to rid themselves of these white supremacists, these Nazis who are ruining things for America. And the average normie, like you said, most people are normies. They don't give a fuck about this shit. They can just go on living their normie life in current multiracial America. I don't see how any party loses by having white nationalists just carve out a little part of land for themselves that's already, say, 97% white and saying, see you later, guys.
Yeah.
Why is this a big problem?
So I don't understand why it would matter. Like, okay, so even if I like it, normally the issues with whether or not these things are going to be good ideas is based on the pragmatics of it. I don't think that like teleportation is a good idea if it's not pragmatic. Just as I wouldn't think that wanting an ethno-state is a good idea if it's not pragmatic. If you come here and you're like, I want an ethno-state, but I don't know what an ethno-state is. I don't know what it would look like. I don't know like where that would be or how it would work out or anything like that, then you don't actually want an ethno-state. You just want something, but it's not an ethno-state.
What I think you do there, or people in your position, what I think you're doing there essentially is saying, okay, I can win this part of the debate potentially. I can explain how the creation of an ethno-state is impossible. It's a pipe dream. Therefore, I don't even actually have to challenge the fact of maybe, or the idea that maybe an ethno-state is a good idea. If I can get people to concede to the idea that the formation of an ethno-state is a good idea, that is a huge victory. That is a massive victory, because essentially what you're saying is that, yes, I agree with you. There's validity to the white nationalist movement. Now, hey, if you guys can build your teleporter, go for it. But I'm not going to invest any of my resources into it. And going back to the whole teleporter analogy, that's pretty much what your argument would be. Hey, this is a great idea you have here, but it's stupid because it's not going to work. Therefore, I'm not going to invest any resources. But in theory, if you could build this thing, yes, it is good. So
Yeah.
if the majority of Americans can agree that, hey, this is a good idea, now we can start moving towards building the blueprint.
Yeah, sure. I that's close enough to making sense. So, so like, that's kind of my issue though, is that like, I don't even know. So like, you would say that I'm white, right? I'm half Native American. Like, I don't know what that means as far as an ethno-state. I don't know how that like actually fits into this sort of idea. And whether or not I would think it was a good idea would be based on whether or not like it is pragmatic again. So like, I feel like the two are tied into one thing. I understand what you're saying with like getting people on board first, and then maybe like we could move forward, or at least having like a group that we could, build like an identity around and then move forward with that. But if the identity is built around something ridiculous, so like Black Lives Matter started off making a big deal about, I think his name was like Michael Brown or something like that, and a lot of people started jumping off the bandwagon because that was ridiculous. The guy was obviously guilty. Like, we didn't want to build anything around that. Trying to get him off his charges was, or sorry, not off his charges, but trying to get any sort of justice for him was completely stupid. But they could have made a big deal about, yeah, well, we just want people on board with the idea that like we want justice for Black people in general. But if you're building it around Michael Brown, this is not going to work. So all of us are just going to go ahead and say screw it and move on to something else. Once they did screw it and move on to something else, things started working again, until they started doing the whole like ACAB and abolish the police. Like, all of it is built around, the movements are built around the pragmatics of the ideas and what will work, what won't work, whether or not this is even a movement worth building.
Okay, well, I get what you're saying. Like, some things can work in theory, but they don't work in practice, right? Like, I guess maybe Marxism is a good example of that, even though I don't agree with a lot of the theory. But for argument's sake, yeah, there's political ideas that don't actually work in application. But that's not really your argument here. Your argument is just, hey, I don't think you can do it. I don't think you can build the craft. I don't think it can happen. You're not really arguing that, hey, this will lead to bad things.
I don't know if you can.
That when you put it into practice, it will be harmful. Like, Marxism put into practice is pretty fucking shitty, right? So that's not really your defense here. Your defense is just simply, hey, I don't think it can work. But if it can, all the power to you. And if that's what you're saying, if that's what America is saying to the white nationalists, that's a huge victory. That's a huge victory. If we can just be looked at as, you know, a legitimate group that wants its own, you know, chunk of land. I know this is fantasy talk, right? The majority of America actually respecting our wishes, please. But in terms of this conversation, this debate, if you could be, if you can sit there and say, yeah, you know what, the idea of an ethno-state is a good idea, but I'm not sure it can work. To me, that's a victory.
Well, again, it's not. I don't think it matters whether or not it's a good idea. So like, there's lots of ideas that I don't think are good ideas, but I wouldn't have a problem with people doing it. But if you guys, like, if your idea is of an ethno-state is, hey, we're going to go buy a big chunk of land and we're only going to allow us to live there, our group to live there, like, nobody cares. Like, that's your land, you buy it, you do what you want with it.
Trust me, they definitely care, my friend. Otherwise, these debates wouldn't be happening, right?
But yeah, if that's not the idea, if the idea is, oh, well, we want land given to us, and then we want to be able to kick people out of this land, and then we want to be able to test everybody that comes in based on some sort of, like, these are completely different ideas that some people, it's not that they would support it, but they wouldn't care one way or the other based on which idea it is. And so all I'm asking is, what is the ethno-state? Like, what does that mean?
Okay. Absolutely. It's a fair enough question. I view these debates, and I even originally messaged Brittany in a way to kind of clear this up, but it's very hard to title videos. So you got to just title it ethno-state, right? But I essentially wanted the debate to be, is an ethno-state a good idea? Because I know the counter argument from the left is, or from centrists or whatever, is always at some point going to be, but hey, you can never make this happen. So even if I beat them on all the other points, they could always just end off at saying, hey, you know, this is just a pipe dream. So the debate could very well just be, is an ethno-state even possible? And who even cares about the morality, ethics, or anything else involved? So if we say, okay, the first half of the debate is over, we're now moving on to whether an ethno-state is possible, I can do that. But I would like you to concede that, hey, maybe an ethno-state is a good idea.
Again, it depends on what it is. I don't know that I think that there is a possibility to where I wouldn't care if people had an ethno-state. I don't know that I would ever say that it's a good idea, but I don't know that. But I think there's a possibility that I just wouldn't care.
Okay. Well, basically, how I would see the ethno-state forming would be somewhere along the lines of this picture. You have a state that is essentially already homogeneously white. You know, super majority, 97% white, like West Virginia. I've heard people talk about Iowa, Idaho, even Alaska. I think it's only actually 75 or 80% white in Alaska, but there's just tons of open land. So maybe there could be like, you know, a portion of Alaska taken. Anyways, there are lots of areas where you have super white majorities. And if it were to be established as a white ethno-state, the remaining minorities would be assimilated into the racial collective very, very soon. You wouldn't have to establish any sort of racial or racist laws. It would just be a playing out of inevitability, like we're seeing happening in America, right? As time ticks by and more immigrants come in, you see white numbers continue to dwindle. Well, in the reverse, it happens reverse. So I guess I could start it off there in terms of painting a picture for you.
So the idea seems to be that people want an ethno-state anyways. Like their in-group bias would make them want to live around other people like them anyways. And so as long as you get the numbers up to like something like 90%, most everybody would move out of there anyways and go find other people like them to live around.
Yeah, well, in a super white majority, you don't have to worry about ethnic enclaves forming because the minority population doesn't represent significant enough numbers to do so.
And so if other minorities end up moving there, there wouldn't be any laws against that.
No, they wouldn't be welcome. So that would be
By
like
law.
You would have no anti XYZ race laws within the ethno-state. But in terms of security and borders, yes, you could say there would be racist laws because we'd only be allowing white people in.
Okay, so you did say no racial laws, but you mean like just based on none once you're in there, but like you would have
the people who are currently there. This is the picture that I'm personally painting. We don't have a unanimous consensus within the white nationalist community on what the white ethno-state will be like, because our first goal is to convince our community that this is what we need to be working towards. And then our second goal is basically networking and building some sort of funding to get this off the ground and getting the right people with the right brains to actually draw up the blueprints. So this is where I see the white nationalist movement is we need to figure out, are we going the Groyper way, infiltrate the Republican Party, or are we going the white nationalist way, which is an ethno-state? And I'm an advocate for the ethno-state.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if I got an answer there. I'm asking, you go in and take over a state that's already majority white, right? And you're saying you don't kick them out, but you also don't let other minorities in.
Correct.
And your assumption would be probably that most of them would leave anyways because they wouldn't want to be there.
Yeah, and their future offspring would have no choice. They wouldn't really have options to breed within their own race. Like when you're the only black kid in school, how do you find another black kid to breed with, right? And what are the chances that that other black kid's going to be the same age, or you're even going to be attracted to them? So if we were to basically have a super white majority with, you know, minimal amounts of Hispanics, blacks, Chinese that only collectively represent maybe 2 to 3% of the population, it'd only be a matter of time before they get assimilated out. Okay. That's my personal belief. Some people are meanies, if you want to say, you know, like bad guy white nationalists, where they would say, no, we're going to kick them out, or we're going to implement some sort of mean laws against them. But I'm not an advocate of that. I say, no, we just need to border up a place for ourselves and let time do its thing.
Okay. And we don't have to get too much into the minutia of that. Like, you're not like, obviously there would be some people who don't look white or might look white or something like that. I don't care too much about that. Okay. So the hope is that building this place creates an area where white people would be preserved in some way, or like white ethnicity. This includes Italians, Russians, like anything that just kind of looks white in general. They can all intermix and breed with each other because they're all white European looking people.
No Portuguese.
No Portuguese. I don't.
No, I'm just joking.
I
I'm
don't-
just joking.
So what is the benefit of like preserving the white race in this way? Like, what do we get out of that?
Well, there's a bunch of different avenues I could take right off the bat. I mean, I actually thought I was going to be arguing against a leftist. You describe yourself more as a centrist type. So the whole diversity is our strength argument might not be the best against you. However, I truly believe that diversity is a good thing, whether it's music, food, crayons, and a crayon box. If we have a crayon box with only one brown color, we are limited. It's clearly an inferior crayon box to a crayon box that has all the colors of the rainbow. So as a human species, not as a nation or a society, as a human species, I think we are better. We're more interesting. We're stronger having Asian culture, having, European culture, having Africa. Well, I don't know about that one. Bit of a joke there, but yeah, I think we are a more interesting species to say an objective alien onlooker who would look down and say, wow, look at what these Asian people did. Look at what these white people did. Look at what so-and-so have done. And that makes us a lot better, more interesting than if we were just one brown mixed group. So yeah, I can honestly say preserving the white race keeps one more crayon in the crayon box, and it's a crayon that I happen to really like.
So it sounds like you're more interested in diversity of culture, though, which we could have diversity of culture with one race. Like if all of us intermix so much to where we would all become one race, we could still have different cultures. In Europe right now, most of everybody is white, but they still have a ton of different cultures. They have a lot of diversity in cultures. Like Russians and English people are completely different groups of people, and they are lost if they go into the other country and try to get along like they're still in the same country or still getting along with the same culture. Like they are completely different, and it's the same in Sweden, or it doesn't matter what group of countries you go to, they all have massively different cultures. And it seems like that you're grouping things based on color, but you would still lose diversity if you actually cared about diversity in that case.
Well, we could talk about diversity in terms of like phenotype and aesthetics. There's a certain aesthetic that is unique to the white race that we would be losing. Blonde hair, blue eyes is a great example of that. It's basically globally seen as a very beautiful thing. I mean, Genghis Khan even specifically went after blonde-haired, blue-eyed women, right? It's a very attractive feature. I'm not even trying to make the superior argument here, because I could see why people would say Latino women or Asian women are very attractive, etc. But I appreciate the unique aesthetics and phenotypical expressions of the European people. I mean, aesthetics is a whole branch of philosophy. It's an aspect of our life that is hugely important. And to imagine a human species 1,000 years down the road, 100,000, it doesn't matter, where there's no white people. The people who invented the computer chip, the people who invented the music and the sports that I love, who've allowed me and you to communicate like we are right now. For an alien species to come in contact with a future human race and be like, who were the people that invented all? What? They all went extinct? All these amazing people, what, that whole group is gone? We just went the way of the Aztecs or whatever? No, I refuse to accept that future for my people. And I would want the same for anybody else. If you're a Chinese man, refuse to accept a future where the Chinese don't exist. If you're a Jew, refuse to accept a future in which Jews don't exist. I think this is natural human intuition.
I mean, I debate the far left on a consistent basis. I vote Democrat. I literally, am in contact with anarcho-communists all the time. None of them care about diversity, and just for the sake of diversity. Like, there are some benefits that come with diversity. There are some negatives that come with diversity. It's like a Democrat slogan to just say diversity is our strength, but nobody really believes that. Nobody cares about diversity just for the sake of diversity. It sounds like you more so care about diversity than any of them would. But I don't, even with what you're saying it would be crazy if we found out that they were gone. But like, I don't know what the negative from that is. Like, they're gone, but like, nothing happens.
It's a sad thought. Just like if, say, an individual, like let's look at this on an individual level, because we do have an instinctual desire to survive on an individual and group level. There's the gay uncle theory, which suggests that some men actually have this genetic predisposition to not want to have kids, but actually take care of other kids because this would be beneficial for the tribe, and these types of traits would be beneficial for the group. So it's in our natural inclination to think about a future in which we don't exist, and we want to think about our children, our grandchildren, to give our life more purpose. So if we extend this onto a group level or onto a nation level, it would make Americans sad to think of a world in which America doesn't exist. We want to keep America alive. Every nation wants to keep its nation fighting and strong long after they die. So you could say, well, what's the point? What does it matter? You're going to die. It's over for you. Why is it so sad to think of a future in which, you know, your lineage or your people don't exist? Well, the answer is quite obvious. It's just human nature.
But I don't know that it is human nature if most Americans don't seem to care if their race is disappearing. Wouldn't that disprove that that's human nature? Like, it seems like most white European countries as well just don't seem to care that white people are disappearing.
People are being programmed to go against their human nature. An example of this is when we look at kids, they have a natural inclination to stay within their own racial group. They naturally are more afraid of and less trusting of those who look less familiar. And we have to essentially program them into thinking that, no, we're all the same. Same thing with attraction. Most people, when they reach an age where they can form attraction, they are attracted to their own. And then society over time can manipulate them, can influence them into, being more diverse. There's lots of studies that show these types of things, which people are actually naturally racist, and we have to be programmed into thinking otherwise.
Yeah, okay, but let's say that that's true. There's also, natural instincts that are gone from us, or that we try to socialize people to not actually recognize as well, like bushes shaking. We're supposed to get nervous and afraid, and we kind of tell everybody, like, no, don't worry about it. Nothing's actually going to happen because civilization has evolved past that point. We do that with lots of things that are just instinctual to us, where we say, well, we've kind of evolved past that. It's not necessary anymore. I would say that that's the same with race. We've kind of evolved past the point to where we would actually need to pay attention to any sort of instinctual desire to keep our race, if that's actually a thing.
Well, I could think of really ground level reasons why. If you ask, say, the average white woman, what type of man are you attracted to? She would say white men. Especially behind closed doors. In public, she might be a little afraid to say this, but typically women do prefer to date within their own race. So if you were to remove men of their race from the world, that would be horrible from them because they wouldn't have mating selections. So you can see how on a group level, on a macro level, it matters to have people like yourself around, because those are the people that you prefer and essentially are likely to mate with. So it's kind of hypocritical to say, you know what, I don't care about race, yet the only people I'm willing to pass my genes on are people of the similar race as me. I find that very hypocritical.
Well, it's not hypocritical. You said yourself that we're being socialized out of it. So if we're being socialized out of it, then we wouldn't actually care. We wouldn't actually have a huge preference for one race or the other.
Well, that would just be following the cuckery, to just continue to go along with your brainwashing and say, yeah, I'm just gonna, zombie walk my way through this. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. If anything, I'd be trying to walk people back into going and embracing their tribal instincts.
I understand.
We are tribal people. This is why we watch football. This is why we love war. This is why we love to see conflict. It's within our nature to want to root for something and get behind something. Some people get behind a sports team. Some people get behind a political movement. I used to think sports were really important until I realized politics was actually affecting my life far more than how far Tom Brady can throw a football.
Yeah, I understand. I gave an example of where lots of times what you call cuckery, like brainwashing, being socialized out of our instinctual patterns, wouldn't actually be a bad thing. And I keep asking, why would this actually be a bad thing? Why can't we just socialize out of it when we evolve past it like we do with literally everything else?
Well, I've been trying to avoid one part of the debate because I feel like it's been exhausted in a lot of other debates, and that is whether or not homogenous societies are more cooperative and more highly functioning than diverse societies. And I think when we look at cities, when we look at rural versus urban, when we look at, say Japan or China, and the types of strength that they seem to be able to implement, and the type of strength that we lack, I don't think diversity is a strength when you mix all the colors together. When you keep the colors separate and allow for moderate mixing to get, maybe some unique flavors like turquoise and pink or whatever, this is great. But when we mix all the paint together, we get one brown color. So I'm just saying that for clarification. I appreciate global diversity. I do not promote like nation, like in nation type of diversity. Sorry to go off on that little tangent. I'll let you
But again, everything you're mentioning just sounds like more socialization. Like when we're talking about cooperations within cities versus rural areas and things like that. I used to live in New York City, then I lived in Atlanta, now I live in the suburbs. Like it seems like the sort of environment that I grow up around is going to change the way that I act and the way that I get along with everybody else around me at the same time.
Well, I think what we're talking about is our community and how it affects us and what type of community we want to live in. That's what we're talking about here, right?
Sure, kind of, but like I don't understand why we wouldn't want everybody to be socialized to exist better. And so if we're talking about like splitting everybody off, wouldn't we want this group of people actually it'd be better for them to integrate so that we don't have this, let's say it's just a freaking wild animals running around ravaging everything. Like we would want them to integrate. It might be hard for a short amount of time, but in the long run we'll actually have a better society or country for it.
Well, I think the evidence shows that homogenous societies are more higher in trust, lower in crime. If we look at like rural areas compared to urban areas, again, like the point that I'm making. So this basically shows that when you have a group of people that are similar, they tend to trust each other more. They're less likely to rob and steal because they view themselves as somewhat of an extended family. But when you have people speaking different languages, different religions, different colors, literally different smells, for Christ's sakes, they don't coalesce in the same way. Okay, and I can give you anecdotal scenarios. I own a trailer, and every time I go and visit my trailer on the weekends and when the weather's nice, I enter a sense of community. The entire town, the surrounding area, everybody there is just wonderful. They all get along. They all talk. They could use similar pop culture references, etc. This type of thing you do not see in Toronto. You do not, people on the bus, people on the streets, they just want to be alone in their little freaking world because nobody gets along. Nobody wants to get along. They just want to be around people like themselves. People form friends and they choose to date people that are similar because it's just natural human instinct. So when we extend this to a culture or race, again, what do we have? Higher functioning societies, happier societies when things are homogenous.
Sure. So my
Well, if you
question,
say sure, that's just kind of the end of debate. You can't really say sure.
no, because that doesn't answer my question whatsoever. My question was, why wouldn't we still want to integrate anyways to make things better for the long run? And you just
Why wouldn't we
repeated what
want to
you said
be
before
sunny
I
every
asked that
single
question.
day and have $1 million in our checkings account because certain things are impossible? I think it'd be great to have Asians slam dunking at the same rate that blacks are, but it's not going to happen because of biological setbacks
So you
and
don't think it's
individual.
social?
I think a lot of it has to do with genetics, yes, but I don't want to muddy the waters, so I've been doing my best to stay away from that. But if
Okay.
we want to get real about certain things in terms of crime statistics, IQs, and why certain groups don't get together, to expect blacks to be as good at, say, math and English as Asians is to expect Asians to be as good at slam dunking and scoring touchdowns. China can invest all their money and resources in having the best Olympic team ever. They're still not going to run faster than a black man who gets basic training in Jamaica. You know why? Genetics. So when we talk about the brain and we talk about cognitive abilities. Well, the same thing is happening there. Certain groups are gifted with certain genes that are going to be more likely to be conducive to intelligence or whatever, and other groups not so much. So yeah, this is why certain groups don't get along. Blacks would say view Asians as like little pussies that can't make it in the streets. Asians would view blacks as like kind of like Neanderthal idiots that can't make it in the business world. And so racism is just natural. Asians hate blacks and blacks hate Asians. To be honest, they're probably the two groups that get along the least. An Asian man and a black woman, you never see that happening because the two don't want to have anything to do with each other.
Sure. So all of the things that you're talking about, even genetics, a lot of these things are environmental. So like black people from Kenya are more likely to be able to run fast and for longer periods of time because of the altitude that they grow up in, and that ends up part of their genetics, right? It'd be the same with anything else. The more people integrate, the more that they're going to change, the more that their environmental change, the more that their genetics change. We can even see this with black people moving into the United States and integrating more and more. Their IQs go up higher and higher. Like we can see all over time that people change and adapt to the environment that they live in. And so I'm not necessarily trying to get into the race realism. My point overall is that we're going to adapt. A lot of these things are socialized, and if they're not socialized, the genetic parts will adjust or adapt to the social aspects anyways.
Okay, so you would say that blacks have a natural biological advantage when it comes to running. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Do you agree that Asians or whites have a natural biological advantage when it comes to cognitive abilities?
Yes.
Okay, so that is all race realism is. Nothing else needs to be said. You agree with race realism. We don't have to have any more debate about that.
What?
Tom is a race realist anyway.
I feel like no matter what I say,
present positions that the person just can't get away with. They know if they say, okay, yeah, you know what, this one group is physically gifted. I'd actually be saying blacks are superior. If you agree blacks are physically superior, but you don't think that they're intellectually inferior, they would actually be the superior group.
I don't know if you like literally aren't listening.
Well with you, and you know intuitively, you agree that all groups have their weaknesses and strengths.
Okay.
And that is race realism.
I don't know if you're not listening to anything that I'm saying, but you respond with something completely different than what we're talking about and then act like it's an own on me when it's literally not related whatsoever. I just went out explaining how we end up with these genetic differences, and you completely ignore that. And you're like, oh, so there is genetic differences. There's genetic differences. What?
I don't disagree with a lot of the explanations for why the races are different. I just maintain that, yes, they are different. And then when I challenge people like you actually agree and say, yes, they are different. But here's why. And you think explaining why somehow rebuts what I'm saying.
Well, so the difference is, yes, most people are race realists, meaning that they believe that race is real. Most people also believe that IQ doesn't matter all that much when we're integrating societies because those will adjust based on the environment. That's what I'm talking about. Other race realists who argue the other side act like it will not adjust based on the environment. That's the split between race realists and people who don't really care about the race realism because they care more about the social aspects.
No race realist worth his salt thinks that the environment doesn't affect things because obviously
race realism doesn't matter.
Of evolution. No, because honestly, Tom, I don't mean to say this condescending, but you do have a lot to learn in terms of the nature versus nurture debate. And any evolutionist or biologist will say that it takes both of the two to fucking tango. Okay. You cannot have.
That's what I'm saying, though. This is ridiculous.
So what you deny, what most people try to deny is that there is a biological difference. You tonight conceded that. Okay, I agree that environment plays a role, but I also agree that there are biological differences. If there are biological differences between the races, therefore it is real. The race realism debate is over. It's been over for a while. We've won it a while ago. Now all we're talking about is, does race realism matter and can an ethno-state be made?
Oh my
That's what
goodness.
we're
You're not going to
debating.
respond to anything I'm saying. We
But
can
you're
move on
asking me
to
a
questions.
specific
He
question,
hasn't.
and I'll
He's,
respond.
I've literally said over and over, why do I care that the race is real if it still adjusts to the environment? Why do I care? It's going to adjust to the environment.
Okay, so then I got a more specific question from you here.
It's the same question like 5 freaking times now. It's the same question over and over. You got to be kidding me.
Questions.
I asked the same question.
Yes,
oh my
but you're
goodness.
saying it in Tom. You say it in the context of making a certain point, where it's hard to tell if this is an actual sincere question or if it's part of the rhetoric. If it's part of you bolstering your point.
Okay.
So the question that you're asking me is, if the environment can change the biology, why do you care about the biology?
Mm-hmm.
Because it takes X amount of years, X amount of resources in order to do that. As I already explained, and I thought this China example already rebutted what you're trying to say, China spent so much money, dumped so much money into their Olympic Games. They literally have an athlete who's been scientifically trying to comprise this method to maximize his pumps just to make it into the top 10 of the 100-meter race. They haven't been able to do it. So what this tells us is that no amount of environment, no amount of institutionalized favoritism or support can help a Chinaman run as fast as a black athlete. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's where race matters, and environment has a certain ceiling, just like genetics have a certain ceiling. Have I answered your question?
No, because when we're talking about integrating societies, when we're talking about integrating races, we're not talking about whether or not we can get them to run fast enough, bro.
Okay,
you know
so
that's not what we're talking about.
You don't seem to be able to understand that there's the direct parallel on the other side of the equation. So let's talk about it. No matter how hard we try, we are not going to be able to produce as many black chess champions, black inventors, black computer programmers, that black Steve Jobs, etc., as we are whites and Asians, because there's a certain genetic limitation. We can do a lot to improve the overall state, but we can't do enough to completely equalize it. That's why there hasn't been a white person in the top 10 100-meter race since it's been invented. Do you not think whites are trying as hard? Do you not watch hockey and other sports in which whites completely dominate strongman competition? The argument that whites aren't trying as hard is completely ridiculous. It's obviously a biological setback. You already agree with this, which you're laughing about. But then when we talk about IQ and intelligence, you say, no, there are no racial setbacks. There are no biological setbacks. The environment can solve everything. You are wrong. It can't. I hope I've answered your question.
Okay. I don't know. You've already agreed. You can't say that. You've already agreed that like the environment changes the genetics. So like for you to go back and be like, oh, it can't change. It can't change. I don't care about how fast they can run. You don't care about how fast they can run. Nobody cares about how fast they can run. For you to continuously bring this up as though anybody cares, nobody cares. The parallel doesn't matter either. We're talking about the fact that the way that people act, the way that they think, their genetics change based on the environment that they're in. And we can see data seeing how fast people's IQs actually move up. We see this happening at a rapid rate for black people.
Been able to bring blacks to parity. We've had a black president. We've been bending over backwards, and there's still a full standard deviation away.
Bro, they've only been
how many
in
more
our
years
schools.
do we dump into this, bro? How much more of this should be a white man's burden?
It's been 2 generations, man. What are you talking about?
2 generations. Blacks had a higher Q in the 1950s than what they do right now. The fuck are you talking about, bro?
No, their IQs have gone up.
They went up and then they went down. Blacks were doing better in college. We're committing less crime, and we're doing far better in the 1950s than they ever have been. They took a deep sink in the 80s, and yes, they have been getting better since then, slowly. But this idea that we're going to bring them to parity and we're going to see black chess champions,
it's 2 generations, black, bro. This is ridiculous. What do you expect in 2 generations?
And how many generations do you think it's going to take? How much of this should be the white man's burden?
It's not the white man's burden. It has nothing to do with the white man.
If it wasn't for our institutions and our nations, we wouldn't be able to get them up to parity. And if we just were to leave them below sub-Saharan Africa without ever venturing down, they still wouldn't even have invented the wheel. And you can't blame that on colonialism, because we never even freaking met them.
I don't agree that America is white man's country or white man's institutions.
What I'm saying to you is, in order to get black IQ up to the level of whites, we have to artificially implement certain protocols, certain policies, certain things to get them up to our level. This takes money. This takes resources, which we've already been dumping. So when you say, oh, it's just easy, environment, what are you talking about, environment? We've been doing everything we can. How much billions of dollars did the Trump administration give them? How many billions of dollars have basically all the government organizations been giving them since the 80s? Same thing here in Canada. Trudeau gave 500 million to Black entrepreneurs specifically. Where are all the great Black businessmen? We've dumped the money in, and guess what? It goes nowhere. Just like we dump money in Africa.
The expressed reason for those things had nothing to do with IQ.
Environment can solve it. Therefore, I don't care if we spend X trillions of dollars and however many generations. It's our job, white people, to get Blacks up. But are Blacks sitting there thinking, hey, how do we get whites and Asians to perform better at basketball and football, right? They just accept that there's differences. The whole world does.
Those have nothing to do with culture.
About making other races more athletic, but there's a huge concern with trying to make Blacks do better in academia and in the workforce. And in doing this, it's wasting billions, trillions of dollars and generations. You laugh, but it's true. And you have no rebuttal for it.
Because we agree on it. We freaking agree. You keep talking about crap that we agree on. I don't care.
Let's talk about what we disagree.
No, I've been trying to do that. I've been trying to do that for like 30 minutes. You keep bringing up the fact that we're different in how fast we run. I don't care. I don't care.
Tom,
I don't freaking care. I don't care at all. I don't know how many times I'm going to say this. I'm going to lose my freaking mind. I don't care.
You're going to say the same thing.
You're going to say the same thing again. You're going to say it again. I don't care. I don't even care.
I'm not even going to do it again.
I don't. Okay.
You help me out. If maybe somebody in the chat can.
This is my closing statement. I am going to tell you where I disagree with him again.
He says, yeah, he can't argue else, so he just spurs.
I'm not going to argue with you on things that we agree on. You're correct.
I don't know what to say, man. What do you disagree with me on? Or Brittany, can you tell me what he disagrees with me on? Because at this point,
I'm waiting for you to disagree with me. Trump can push a bunch of money into these things. The express reason for this is not to raise IQ. That has nothing to do with raising IQ. It has to do with getting them better education. How fast people run or how good they are at football or basketball has nothing to do with how well they will do within society or how well they can integrate or how well we can move forward. Has nothing to do with it. So all of these things that you keep bringing up, when what we're talking about is everybody integrating and the fact that they will adjust, including their DNA, will adjust to the environment. The fact that you keep bringing up other crap that isn't relevant is the problem. We have only been putting them in regular schools, in meaning like integrated schools, since like the 50s, bro. For you to think like, oh, look, it hasn't happened yet. It's only been 70 years. It hasn't happened yet. It'll never happen. It's only like 2 generations. If we talk about 3, 4, yeah, it'll probably be caught up at that point.
Okay, so Tom, let me cut you off for 1 second.
Tom, yeah.
That's where we disagree. To just
I know.
So now you know where we disagree? Are you going to start yelling about that?
I have known where we disagree the whole time. You are the one who is not on the same page. I don't think we should spend
X amount of generations or X amount of time into bringing Blacks to parity. You just said, if we just spend, it's only been 2 generations, you said, we've only done this amount. If we just do this much more, maybe we can get them up to our level. That's where we disagree. So maybe we should just move on to the next point now.
Sure.
Okay.
Are we moving on to a next point, or are we going on to...
How far in are we to we're a little over an hour. Let me just take a quick look at something here, make sure that there's nothing. Okay. I just want to ask you a question here. Do you think if whites theoretically had a white state of their own, do you think America as a whole would be better off? Do you think that identity politics would somewhat be distinguished in America if we could have an actual physical separation of these 2 opposing sides?
Nah, I don't think it would get better or worse. I don't think it would make a difference.
Okay, so I'm interested in hearing why you think that. If you remove 2 people from a conflict usually that ends the conflict, correct? That's usually the best way of managing a hostile conflict. I've been involved in conflict resolution and mediation at different points in my life. And sometimes there are situations where two parties are just too hostile and there is no form of remediation. You have to remove these two people. Do you not think that's to the point that we're at with the far left and the far right?
I don't think that there's a conflict.
Well, of course you do. Come on, let's be real, Tom. You don't think there's a conflict between the far left and the far right? You don't think there's huge political divide in America?
The far left and the far right are like 5% of our country. So that sure, there's a big conflict. I'm super worried about it.
Less than 5% of our countries are murderers and rapists, yet we still treat those things as very real threats, right? You don't have to have the majority of the country being far left or far right for those two factions to be presenting problems for one another and the people in the middle. I mean, look at the riots, Black Lives Matter. Look at the left getting all upset about the attack on Parliament Hill or whatever the hell it is. Capitol Hill. Sorry, we have Parliament Hill in Canada.
Well, the problem with the Capitol Hill thing has nothing to do with violence. It had to do with the fact that people were trying to change like votes for an entire country.
When it actually affects an entire country, divide is vast, man. Like, let's meet at some middle ground here, right? Like, can we not agree? Like, this is why we have channels like Politically Provoked. If you go back to 2008, I don't even know if Politically Provoked would have a chance because things weren't so polarized, right?
I mean, I guess like if you want to.
No offense to Politically Provoked, an amazing channel. I'm just saying, politics is huge compared to what it was, and it's mostly because of identity politics, right? Especially when you look at the Zoomers, right? I just watched a debate the other day at Politically Provoked. This young kid talking about Holocaust denial, like, holy shit, this guy knows more than I do about that stuff, and he's what, 20 years old or something like that. And then there's this chick who was talking about porn. She seemed very like. When I was, 18, 19, kids weren't this informed. Politics is becoming like more and more of a thing that represents your identity and your personality. So to say that America isn't largely polarized and divided, can you walk that back?
Like Republicans and Democrats are largely divided as well, but we're not divided on like race issues or like anything that would actually be polarizing as stuff or enough to like cause like some sort of civil war. Like I think for the most part we all still get along just fine.
Well, if you look at like branches of the Republican machine, if you will, whether that's the Groypers or what's that guy with the small face and the big head, Charlie Kirk, they talk about identity politics all the time. The Ben Shapiro's, Steven Crowder's, Jordan Peterson's, like identity politics is at the forefront of these guys' careers, of the political conversation, of the YouTube videos with the biggest views. To say that we're sitting around talking about taxes or even that global warming is in front of racial tensions is to just be totally ignorant. And I think right now you're just deliberately being stubborn. I think you do agree with me, but you're just not willing to walk it back.
Most Republicans and Democrats believe in the same values and believe in the same things when it comes to race. We believe in liberalism and Enlightenment values. We just differ on how to solve these issues.
Okay, right at the
don't
center,
have those same values, so you guys
you're talking
are completely
about like
different.
Mainstream face value politics, right? So I would say that yes, the Republicans and the Democrats are kind of like two sides of the same coin. The Republicans have lost all their balls, right? They're not really actually fighting for social issues. They've given up so much of the battle, but their constituents, they're following. The average Republican in America, it completely disagrees with the average liberal. They do not see eye to eye on things, but because there is this kind of meeting at the center in terms of the power structures, I do agree with you that the average Republican is similar to the average Democrat, but there is this huge divide that is going to obviously get a lot of attention. So again, going back to what I was saying, even if you only have a small percentage of Americans that are gangbangers or rapists or murderers, that's still something to be very concerned about. So in politics, if you have 5% that is far left, another 5% that is far right, and these groups are kind of going at war with both the center and each other, well, that's something to be concerned about. It doesn't have to represent the majority of America. So your argument that most Republicans and Democrats think alike, I don't really think has that much weight, because it ignores the huge divide that is actually getting the most attention.
The last I looked, it was 2% of all Americans believe in socialism or Marxism or communism or something like that. And then it's about 4%, 3 to 4% that would be considered dissident right, like alt-right or something like that. Groypers, those sorts of people. So it's about 5 to 6%. If 5 to 6% of the country thought the world was flat, I wouldn't think this is some issue that I need to go fix. Like, it would still just be a non-starter.
I think if 5% of America thought the world was flat, that actually, who knows? With America, like, there are some states and stuff like that. So never mind. I don't even want to make a comment with that. But I don't know what to tell you. If you don't think America is politically divided, if you don't think there is extreme racial tensions and seemingly no solution in sight that is going to satisfy both sides, like the left and Black Lives Matter are fixated on the idea that it is white racism, white systemic racism that is holding them back. Whites believe the opposite. Whites believe that it is anti-white racism, which is making it harder for them to get by, for them to have a family.
But our goal is the same.
Enjoy their lives. No, the goal isn't the same, because there's also white preservation thrown into the mix, right? Like, it's a multi-pronged argument. It's not just like, hey, we want to maximize our economic well-being, or we want to maximize our safety, or we want to maximize our intelligence. It's the whole shebang, bro.
I don't think it's thrown into the mix to a point where anybody cares. Just like people who want to defund the police, they're not thrown into the mix to the point where anybody cares. Like, they're just not relevant enough for anybody to actually care.
You guys ready for Q&A?
Let's do the Q&A.
Yeah, sure.
And then we'll do closing statements after that. We got 2 super chats over at Entropy. Thank you, by the way, from Quebec. He said, have any of you read Industrial Society and Its Future by Theodore I don't know how to say that. What is
Kaczynski.
it?
Kaczynski.
Oh, okay.
The bomber.
Got it. All right. Funny guy. But have you guys? I don't know if it's a troll question or not. You guys want to answer that?
No, I haven't.
Okay. And then he also said, why would we want to integrate? I'm sick of being discriminated against via quotas for some multicultural dystopia.
There's discrimination in literally everything. Like, everybody discriminates for all sorts of reasons. We're always discriminating all the time. Like, every time I pass a woman, I discriminate and think, like, well, maybe I like her, maybe I think she's hot, maybe she's not. When it comes to, like, businesses, they'll discriminate based on whether or not they think you're going to be a good employee. When you go try out for a team, they discriminate based on whether or not they think that you're going to be good at basketball or football. Everybody discriminates all the time. Discrimination in and of itself is not a problem. If you're discriminating...
Hey, look at him. He's growing so much, Tom. I'm happy to see it happen here.
I have not changed my positions on this. You actually screamed the last time I said this, so...
He's pro-discrimination. I'm so proud of you.
The discrimination in and of itself isn't a problem. It's a problem when we actually start to hamper parts of society or take away people's rights based on that discrimination.
Okay. So from Hard Lock said, keep fighting the good fight, Ronnie. Never give up. And Dusted said, knock, knock, Tom. Okay.
Who's that?
Let's see. From over at D Live from Elronder. I'm gonna have to make this bigger because I can't fucking see what I'm. All right. So he said, Tom, you said you were half Indian. I don't trust you being honest here or elsewhere. Can you prove with a DNA test?
Sure.
Okay. I get this from chat all the time, by the way. So
you're half native.
Cherokee.
Like 50%, not eighth.
So from the I forget what test it was, but it was one of those like DNA tests where they send you prick your fingers, send it back. According to those, but those aren't like super accurate. I would think it would be somewhere more around like 35 to 45%, but yeah.
Do you know both of your parents?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, both of them, their parents were and grandparents were native.
Both of their parents and grandparents were native?
Yes, both of
We didn't-
them were also 50% native Cherokee.
Okay, okay.
Okay. All right. And so he said, can you name me one supranational corporation having? Oh God, these are written so bad. Elron, you do this to me every motherfucking time, and then I get shit for not understanding how to read. Okay, supranational corporation having how to be less. I'm literally reading this word for word, you guys. Having how to be less Jewish, Asian classes for their overrepresentation. What the fuck he's trying to say? Okay, can you name me one supranational corporation? I don't know what he's trying to say. Something about having to be, I guess having to be less Jewish.
Yeah. Like Coca-Cola being less white, or the
Okay,
EU
there you
Council being too white. Can we name an equivalent where the same is said about Jews? I know we can't. Like on a surface level in politics, whenever there's talks about like white or diversity, Jews are basically just considered to be white, right? When you do the snapshot of the EU Council or any of these politicians, they all just seem like white people. And to blacks and to minorities, most of them just view Jews as a type of white, right? Which we can argue about and whatever. You know, I tend to view Jews as a type of white that is just very tribal and unique to their own. So there is this kind of game that can be played where they can be white when it's convenient for them, and they can be Jewish when it's convenient for them.
And we got another super chat from Quebec. Thank you again for the super chat. We don't get those anymore now that we don't have YouTube. So, all right. So he said, I'm talking about mandated quotas that deny me promotions or government money via contracts set aside for minorities, institutional discrimination based on sex and race.
What he just said, I'm talking about it.
I guess that was from his previous one where he said, why would we want to integrate? I'm sick of being discriminated against via quotas for some multiculti dystopia.
Yeah, I think so. Like I explained before, discrimination in and of itself isn't bad. It gets bad when we get to certain points. I normally think that discrimination against white people is bad just based on the fact that like we don't know that we'll be the majority forever. In the trend that we're on right now, we probably won't be the majority for very long. And so I think that like if we started to allow discrimination or allow that to be like part of our a norm within our culture, this could actually be bad for white people in the long run. We already know that like allowing discrimination to become a social norm can have long-term effects on a specific race. And so like, yeah, I think that that's the only reason that I would be against it, like in the here and now, unless you're like unless you're taking away somebody's rights. I don't think it matters all that much.
And then from Elronder said, Tom, do you think in the ethnostate of Japan, people are talking about CRT-like topics more or less than in America?
I think Japan's one of the worst countries in the world, so probably less.
Okay.
Why do you think Japan is one of the worst countries in the world?
Based on their racial problems they have over there.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, just like the lack of immigration, the lack of pushing people out of the country based on race, the splitting people off based on culture, like those. I would think that those are issues, but it's not like a very liberalized country. They'll catch up to us someday.
The implementation of diversity within a national framework is very important for you.
Say that again.
It seems like the pushing of diversity within a national framework is very important for you.
Not for the sake of diversity, no.
Well, why should Japan take immigrants? Why does that displease you that they don't want to take immigrants?
It's not the taking in of immigrants. It's pushing out people before.
You did say pushing people out, but you said, the not taking in of immigrants. You did
Yeah,
specific.
I suppose that doesn't matter as much to me. Like
Okay.
I think that obviously like countries that aren't very liberal are obviously very far behind us, and they'll catch up one day. But normally, like the more liberal and technologically advanced they are, the better they'll do, and one day they'll get there.
Okay.
All right, so from Snorkel Blog said, I'd like to ask Tom what led him to think there's only one logical outcome for peace, to mix everyone together, and where he thinks that idea came from, as it wasn't normal for 99.999% of human history.
I didn't say that. I don't know where they got that from.
Okay.
I think Jake used comment about Tom's contradiction. Do you want to address that, Tom? How every time you speak, you contradict yourself? I just want to give you a chance to defend yourself.
Yeah, sure. It's a real problem. I
chat.
thank you so much for pointing that out. I'll work on it, buddy. I really appreciate it.
There you go, Jake. All right, sorry. Go ahead.
We might be caught up. I think so. So if you guys want to go into closing statements, since Ronnie went first for opening, Tom, you want to go first for closing?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So, diversity normally brings us things that are helpful in some ways, like diversity of thought, diversity of opinions, diversity of culture. Even growing up speaking a different language can give you the ability to think about things differently, and a lot of times those are good. But diversity also can come with bad things, like problems with communication, problems with understanding or empathizing with one another. Diversity is not normally a goal in and of itself. Diversity normally comes with some good things that are helpful, and diversity is just a byproduct of liberalism. And liberalism is good. Liberalism is something that's actually very helpful, and seems to create the greatest country on earth. And we don't seem to be getting worse. The more diverse we get, we seem to be getting better. In a lot of aspects, not all aspects, but in a lot of aspects, we seem to be doing better and better. Not white people, but our country pulled a lot of people over here into this country and just kind of forced them here. They didn't have any choice in it. They're just here now. And just as all of us had no choice but to be born white or to be born with our grandfathers' sins, like we're all here. It's not white people's fault. It's just the country's fault. And now we all have to make the best of it that we can. So when it comes to black people, we're just going to have to do what we can to help them. If they want to move away, if they want to go somewhere else, that's perfectly fine. If white people want to move away or go somewhere else, that's perfectly fine. But as far as the country goes, that's not the plan. That's not a concern for anybody. Nobody cares about these problems enough to say, let's all just split off. They're not that big of a problem, but they're a big enough problem to where we can like make some small efforts here and there to say, hey, let's integrate more to help each other more and more. Over time, I think that people will be blown away that race was ever an issue in the first place.
Okay. All right, Ronnie.
Okay, well, I think that there's something to be said between causation and correlation. Just because the West in many ways has been getting better, that doesn't mean it's a result of diversity. I'd actually say that diversity has hampered our progress, and God only can imagine where we'd be if we remained a more homogenous place. I believe that my opponent here conceded a number of things. Well, I know he did. He conceded the idea that sure, an ethno-state is a good idea. He actually said in his closing statement, he doesn't care if whites, take a piece of America and, have it for themselves as long as America itself stays intact. Now, I don't think anybody in the dissident right really believes we can make America a white ethno-state. I don't think anybody's trying to fight for that. We do have the Groypers who are trying to weasel the way into the Republican Party, but they don't call themselves white nationalists, and they certainly aren't trying to fight to create an ethno-state. So the first thing that we're trying to achieve here is to get people to concede the idea that this would, or concede the fact that this would be a good idea. And my opponent here definitely did that. He also agreed that race is real. He said that it doesn't really matter, although he did concede that it matters, at least on a political or a societal level, even though he thinks himself it doesn't matter, or that the majority of people don't believe that it matters. So I believe I've proven everything that I've needed to prove. I've set out, or I've done what I set out to do. And I'll leave it to you guys to decide who won the debate.
All right. Thank you guys both for joining us. This was fun. We will be back tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern. Richard Spencer and Rob Noor will be debating populism and Trump. And then Thursday, Tom will be back at 9 p.m. Eastern. He'll be debating Wurzelroot on which is like better to platform. Or we had a panel on this like the other week about pedophilia versus racism,
and we know what side Tom
so we're gonna be, he wanted a one-on-one, so we're gonna do that with Wurzel. We've got stuff every night this week. Sunday night we are going to be interviewing Ryan Dawson at 10 p.m. Eastern, but I'm also going to be talking to somebody on Sunday. We got a debate on Friday. We got our pop on Saturday night, and we got a bunch of stuff next week. Richard Spencer and Sean Lass will be debating next week, and Culture Thug and Destiny will be debating next week. So yeah, we got a bunch of stuff coming up.
Oh, and one of the topics for the drinking chat will be Ukraine and geopolitics. So that will be one thing. Maybe we'll spin the wheel, you know?
Yeah, we got to do the wheel again. But yeah, another thing, the main topic that we want to talk about is what kind of future America looks like under each ideology. So for progressives, what kind of future does your America look like? And for conservatives. And so, yeah, and then also what's going on in Ukraine and everything. And then whatever anybody else wants to talk about, because the pop-ons are really just kind of to hang out and drink and get weird. And now we have no chains on us since we will be on Odyssey.
Welcome home. Welcome to Odyssey. Yeah, we knew it was coming. We knew it.
Yeah, we knew this was beer.
It's a blessing in disguise.
I literally like 4 months. I expect like every day. I'm like, wow. But yeah, it's whatever. So the chains are off. So get ready for Saturday with me.
Unless people are streaming, like we wouldn't do that too. Like,
oh yeah, I would never intentionally bomb someone's stream because as a fellow person, what I'm saying is, if we're doing the drink, everybody's got to know, or you got to warn me that you're streaming. You know, because I'm on Odyssey now.
Exactly. And I want to do on our pop on, like maybe towards the end, I want to do a Omegle thing, like where with everybody on the pop.
Well, we should use you as bait, right?
Me as bait.
Use you as bait. Well, sorry. Yeah.
I mean, what would you do with Omegle?
I don't know.
We're gonna troll them.
We're gonna
fucking get racist. We're gonna get sexist.
You got to be careful.
We can go to like the left wing Omegle, the right wing Omegle. We'll just get crazy.
Yeah, we'll troll Trump supporters.
I'm just saying, as much as Brittany has complained about 2 consent states and stuff like that, you might want to be careful with your whole.
Why?
Well, if you're pulling them on Omegle, but they don't know you're streaming.
Most of these people seem to like know that they're gonna be like getting streamed and stuff. They like kind of ask for it. Or they ask about it whenever I've seen them going on these things. And if they don't want to, we can swipe right or however it works.
Yeah, okay. I've done some Omegle stuff, like debating random people. It's fun.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun, but I think it'll be really fun during a pop-on. Like, I don't know if that's ever happened with people like on a panel going on Omegle.
Maybe you can get a debate coach on Omegle, Tom.
But yeah, all right, so we'll be back tomorrow night at I believe 8 p.m. Eastern, and yeah, we'll be on Odyssey, D-Live, maybe on Trovo tomorrow, and Entropy. So that will be where we'll be. Thanks again, guys. See y'all tomorrow. All right, so we're off on this end. All right.
Yeah, I'm still streaming. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll keep it, Pete. I'll keep it.
I screwed
Yeah.
up, man. I
What'd you screw up on?
should have mentioned in my closing statement. My entire closing statement should have been how he just refused to respond to me the whole debate. That should have been my entire closing statement. I don't know what I was thinking.